Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. It was believed that men who were particularly successful in combat or in avoiding enemy ambushes possessed extremely powerful talismans, usually a piece of the Holy Cross. Cretan nationalist leader Nikos Boutsalis was famed among friends and foes for being in possession of a piece of the Holy Cross that rendered him immune to bullets. Equally famous among his comrades in the Elas 9th Regiment was guerrilla Yanis Kotsakis, who believed that, quote, bullets had no effect on him. Some attributed this to Kotsakis wearing a fragment of the Holy Cross, while others attributed his immunity to a visit from female spirits during his youth. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Diogenes Lamp podcast, the Greek Civil War segment, episode 37, Civil War, the SOE, and the Plaka Agreement. And that excerpt was from Spyros Tsoutsoumpis' book, The People's Army, A History of the Greek Resistance in the Second World War. We had Dr. Tsoutsoumpis on a couple episodes back. He's someone who's studied this expert for almost 2 decades, extremely knowledgeable. Before we get started, also wanted to give a huge shout out, just like I will do every episode, to you, the listeners. You guys make this possible, of course, as well. A huge shout out to my Patreons, my Elephantarchis, Rongtawu, my Zoarchos, Megas Yorgos, Expat Frank, Darth Mater, and None Taken Podcast, Taxiarchos. Thank you guys so much. Your support makes a huge difference. No bullshit. It really makes a huge difference. I don't know if I'd still be doing this if it wasn't for all of you. I don't want to say I would give up, but seeing that there are people that are willing to support this work and really what is independent media in a nutshell is really encouraging. I'm not supported by Wondery app or any other Gold Star or Gold Member Radio or whatever other. If you guys are big into history podcasts, you'll be familiar with those names. I am the writer. I'm the executive producer. I am the sound quality engineer. I am the video engineer. I am A through Z, and I have a day job and a life like you guys do. And, life has its own events that take up time, and I always try to set time aside for this because it makes me happy. And I love history, and I like having a captive audience that I can talk to all day, and knowing that as long as you guys continue to listen, I can talk to you about history, and that makes me happy. So thanks a lot, guys, for your support. Makes a huge difference. It lightens up the dent that this hobby puts in the pocketbook. So yeah, you guys are awesome. Thanks a lot. Also, all my Patreons, I believe, well, not all just yet. One of my Patreons, the book is on the way. The other one, you still haven't sent me your mailing address. If you're comfortable with that, if you're not, totally understand. But if you are a Patreon, I send you a book once a year, usually for either Christmas or for Pascha, which is coming up, Easter. They're books that I've read, books that I like, mostly history, but some historical fiction as well. Historical fiction like, Foundation Pit by Andrei Platonov, which is a great one. Porphyry and Ash by Peter Sandin, which is about the fall of Constantinople. Other books like Hezbollah by Augustus Richard Norton, which is a great little book on Hezbollah. It's one of the best books you can read on Hezbollah. Report to Greco or Zorba the Greek or Christ Recrucified by Nikos Kazantzakis. Greek Fire, Poison Arrows, and Scorpion Bombs by Adrian Mayer. That's a great book. I was really impressed with that book. So I mean, if you're listening to this, I assume you like books. I like books. I'll send you a book that I like. And then one day, when I have enough followers and you guys have read some of the books I've mailed out, we can have like a big book club or whatever. But whatever. It's the least I can do for you guys' support. It means a lot, right? And of course, as always, shoot me a message if there's anything you like, you don't like. Comment. I do look at the comments in YouTube anyways. I do in the Spotify app, not so much. I don't believe. I'm not familiar. I'm not sure if I've looked there recently. But on YouTube, I always respond to the comments. Message me on Patreon, whatever, Instagram, whatever. I am listening to you guys. Also, please support my friend's podcast, None Taken, with Dustin and his friend Alan. If you're at all current events junkie like myself, give them a listen. It's like NPR, but more lighthearted. And there's still obviously very serious discussions that are had, but you will laugh in the process, which is more than what you'll do if you listen to like Chris Hedges' report or NPR or the President's Inbox or on the Middle East with Amber, what's her name? Amber Zamrin? I forgot her name. But those are other, current event podcasts that you can listen to, which are really great. Foreign Affairs podcast, obviously, the gold standard, right? Really great. But yeah, give them a podcast, give them a listen, guys. Support independent media and independent podcasters like ourselves. So, where we left off last, Hellas, in its quest to dominate any post-occupation Greece, had launched an offensive against several rival bands. Most notably, Edes and the Germans took advantage of this fracas to launch massive mopping up operations in northern Greece that had delivered significant blows to Hellas. We are now at the tail end of 1943. So like I just mentioned, last episode we witnessed the formal start of the Greek Civil War. But something we didn't get to before the episode finished were the consequences of Eam Hellas's offensive and how this affected the dynamic outlook the Foreign Office and the SOE had. After all, Britain and everyone else, from Hellas to the SBs to Edes, wanted to be in the best position they could be when the last Nazi would leave Greece. We got into this briefly last episode with the replacement of Eddie Myers by the more anti-communist SOE agent C.M. Woodhouse and how his sacking was a symptom really of a wider internal rift between policy paths of the SOE and the Foreign Office. But before we go any further, I want us to clear the air a bit on SOE Foreign Office relations, because I feel I haven't been the most clear on this relationship, and it's confusing, and I feel bad because I'm scared you guys have been kind of punching in the dark. That's not cool. So, a big question I myself struggled with was how to visualize the hierarchy of organizations like the SOE, the British Military Mission, aka the BMM, which is now the Allied Military Mission, the AMM, MI6, the Foreign Office, yada, 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 yada. Okay? So this is how I would consider looking at it all, okay? At the top is Churchill and his war cabinet, the supreme authority and final arbiter. In three different routes stemming out below are the Foreign Office with its generally pro-monarchist stance, the War Office with its main priority of fighting the Germans, and the Ministry of Economic Warfare. From the Foreign Office, another route branches out below to the left to MI6 and the SIS, who, as we know, were known for being anti-communist because their boss, the Foreign Office, was pro-monarchist. On the other side, where we have the Ministry of Economic Warfare, is another route branches out below and to the right. And here we have our Special Operations Executive, the SOE, who, as we know, were a bit more pro-communist. Not because they were Hajis or really into Marxism or anything, but because they were pragmatic and would work with those who could fight. Remember the goal of the SOE, right? To set Europe ablaze. If the monarchists were better organized, the SOE would have been pro-monarchist. But as we know, that wasn't the case. Then from the SOE on the right, another branch leads to the British military mission, which is now the Allied military mission at this point in our story. While MI6 was separate from the BMM, or the AMM I should say, the MI6 still operated within the theater of the BMM, which of course was Greece itself. MI6 agents were still running around occupied Greece the same way SOE agents were running around occupied Greece as well. So if I made it in the past like the SOE was subservient to the Foreign Office, I apologize, because that's not exactly how it works. Okay, so now we got that covered. Let's get back to how the SOE and the Foreign Office were responding to news of the now official Greek Civil War, which had continued to heat up since early October. One of the first things the War Cabinet decided in late November, when it was confirmed without a doubt that Hellas was doing its thing, was that all military and financial aid to Hellas be cut off, which was substantial, somewhere around 55,000 gold sovereigns, just between April and October of 1943. Not chump change by any means. But by that point, Hellas had already made sizable gains. Like the Blob from that horror movie in the 50s or whatever, Hellas was absorbing or liquidating other rival paramilitaries, and most notably, it even made inroads in the traditionally conservative Peloponnese, where it had eliminated both the EOA and the ES by the end of October of 1943. As for Crete, Hellas was never able to make huge inroads there, which remained under the command of the Republican Emmanuel Mandakas and his EOK. After all aid was cut off from Hellas, the War Cabinet decided it needed to take some additional wind out of Hellas. So a plan was put into place where the king would declare publicly, that part is very important, that he wouldn't return until invited to do so by a properly constituted and representative government. Additionally, Plastiras would be brought in from France and inserted into the mountains to manage the Andartes, and a regency council led by Archbishop Damaskinos would be formed to oversee this transition. There was additional recommendations that Hellas and Edessa would be incorporated into the future Greek army that of course would inevitably have to be formed in any post-occupation Greek state. Remember, to be a legit state, you need a monopoly on the coercion of force, right? Greece would have to become a legit state again after the Nazis left and after the Civil War ended. This would have done some things to simmer tensions. Plastiras, as we know, was a very well-known Republican and Venizelist. He's been out of our story for a while now, really since his failed Venizelos coup in 33 and 35, but he is known best for his role in the execution of the Six after the Asia Minor catastrophe. Damaskinos was a little more complicated. He could be described as sympathetic to Venizelos, or as a Republican, as he was thrown in house arrest by the Metaxas regime, but he was also an archbishop, and as a religious figure, he mostly transcended political lines. As for the public decree by the king, this would have kicked the stool out from underneath the communists, because remember, a big cause of the communists and other Andartiko groups, from the left to the center-right, was resisting the reestablishment of the Metaxist clique, or the monarcho-fascist clique, if you will. If that's what a communist would call it, right? A monarcho-fascist clique. But if it wasn't a guarantee that the king was going to be forced upon Greece, well, then that can go a long way to erode that fighting cause of many. And so the War Cabinet decided that Churchill and Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden meet with King George II in Cairo and to press these proposals on him. But King George also had a separate meeting with the United States President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, and FDR recommended that he not accept this compromise. Why? According to historian Haris Vlavianos, the reasons for this are, quote, still obscure. Historian Gerolymatos in his book, Red Acropolis, Black Terror, gives a similar answer and just leaves it at, quote, but the king, after consulting with Roosevelt, declined. The footnotes don't give any additional info either, just reference some documents from McVeigh and Leeper. So do we want to give some guesses ourselves, put our sleuth hats on or whatever? There's a couple of paths we can go down. One plausible answer is simply the king didn't want to accept the deal, and he was able to convince FDR via his own lobbying that it was unacceptable. Maybe King George said that Damaskinos was a communist sympathizer, or that if he didn't get back to Greece ASAP, Am would seize power, both of which were narratives that were making the rounds in political circles at the time. Or maybe Roosevelt didn't trust the colonial British. Either way, this political blunder will result in the Civil War to continue on through the winter of 1943 and 44, and to leave Churchill and the Foreign Office with the only viable alternative they had to stop the killing, which was a ceasefire between Hellas and Edes. And if you think about it, what does this all come back to? The constitutional question, the national schism. To king or not to king? That is the question. And this question will prove to be a spoiler in negotiations time and time again. But even with the Civil War raging, this was a tiny sideshow to the bigger picture. And while Hellas would be cut off, it didn't mean the British were ready to have a full-on breakup with Ahndartiko as a whole. After all, the more Germans tied down in Greece and the Balkans, the less Germans fighting in Ukraine and Russia, and the less that the British and the Americans would have to fight in Operation Overlord, which had just been agreed upon at the Tehran conference in late November. And so, the Foreign Office proposed, and quote, to restrain the more ruthless members of Hellas and to build an anti-KKE coalition around Damaskinos and the exiled government, which was to be revived and strengthened by including fresh political moderates from Greece. Moreover, the Foreign Office was ready to accept Eam Hellas in a future Greek coalition government. The part about the Foreign Office accepting Eam in a future Greek coalition government may seem shocking, coming from the Foreign Office. But again, keep in mind, and I can't say this enough, everyone, and I mean everyone, was getting ready for the day after the Germans would withdraw from Greece. So yeah, in January of 1944, the Foreign Office got in touch with Tsoutsoumpis, the Prime Minister of Greece in Cairo, and told him that talks need to be initiated with Eam Hellas to end the bloodshed. Tsoutsoumpis agreed, but under the stipulation that only military matters be discussed, not constitutional issues like the status of the king. We've already seen how that's scuttled previous attempts at peace. And so, Tsoutsoumpis reached out to Archbishop Damaskinos and briefed him on the situation and the goal. Damaskinos was told that if Eam Hellas accepted any ceasefire, that Damaskinos would select a committee to negotiate and form a coalition government that would include elements on the left. Tsoutsoumpis authorized Woodhouse to represent him in the talks with Eam Hellas, and after 14 meetings, the first round of the Civil War ended on February 29, 1944, with the signing of the Plaka Agreement. Let's talk a bit about the Plaka Agreement, which officially ended the first round of the Greek Civil War. For starters, it was a ceasefire, and it was signed at the Plaka Bridge, literally a bridge, on the Arachthos River, which was the border between Arta and Yanina. Hellas, Edes, and Ekoukoua would occupy the territory they held at the time of its signing, and the agreement would be supervised by a committee of representatives from Hellas, Edes, and Ekoukoua, which I know we already said earlier that Ekoukoua had been wiped out, but they were still around as a political force per se, and were still considered significant enough to be included in this agreement. Additionally, all groups agreed to exchange prisoners and hostages, and there was a section of the treaty that requested an increase in aid to Ahndartiko groups based, and quote, on their operations against the Germans and in proportion to the real requirements of the war. The signatories included Hellas, Edes, Ekoukoua, and the Allied military mission, Woodhouse signed on behalf of the British, and Major Wines signed for the Americans. Something else emerged during those 14 meetings that I think is important to mention, and that is that on February 19th, 10 days before the Plaka Agreement was signed, a separate agreement was signed by all of the Greek Antartiko groups, and that was a blunt condemnation of the security battalions, who were described as, quote, enemies of the nation, war criminals, responsible to the nation for acts of treason. The reason I wanted to include this tidbit is, well, it's telling. All the groups signed on to this, groups that were just killing each other. And the security battalions, or SBs for short, are going to play a bigger and bigger role as time goes on. One last thing on the Plaka Agreement. There was a secret clause that the guerrilla forces would participate in Operation Noah's Ark when the time came, which Noah's Ark was an Allied operation that was meant to harass German forces as they retreated from Greece. While Plaka did indeed stop the killing for now, and in theory would refocus their energies towards the Germans, Eamelas was not the happiest walking away from the treaty. Aside from the fact that supplies would not resume flowing back to Eamelas, there were two chief demands Eamelas put forward that were outright denied. One, that a provisional committee composed of representatives from the three Antarctico organizations would start negotiations with the government in exile with the sole purpose of establishing a government of national unity. And two, that the resistance organizations should organize into a single guerrilla army under the command of a commander-in-chief. Both of those were rejected. And that's it for today. I know it was a bit of a shorter episode, but join us next time as we enter the interregnum between the first and the second round of the Civil War, and we see how Hellas responds politically to its failure to fully monopolize the resistance by force, for now. Take care.